Hey, what is going on, folks? This is Hellbent, and welcome to AutoHotkey GUI mini tutorial number 29. In this one, I'm going to show you how to use a progress bar. So let's just jump into it. So the first thing I'm going to do is just set up my script using single instance force. Oops. I'm also going to add in a hotkey as an emergency exit. And then I'm going to go ahead and set up the GUI. Okay, with that set up, now I can go ahead and add in the progress bar. So the way to add in the progress bar is just like all the rest of the controls. Just go GUI, the name of the GUI if you're using a name, and then add is the subcommand, and then the type that you're going to be using, or the parameter to, and as it's described there, is progress. Next, we need to position it. So I'm going to just do simple positioning for this tutorial. So I'm just going to do X10, Y10. I'm going to give it a width of, from doing my prep work, I already know a good layout for the size that I want. So I'm going to do 310 pixels wide, and I'll set it to a height of 30, so that way it's nice and big. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to decide what colors it has with it. So the way that you set the colors is, let's assume that the progress has no fill in it yet, so it has zero progress happening. That will be the background color. So to set that, you just type in background, and then the color that you want. So let's go with black. The next color is the fill color that it's going to, as the progress bar fills up, what color do you want that to be? And to do that, you just put C plus the color that you want. And of course, with colors, there's only about 16 colors that you can use by word. Other than that, you can use the hexadecimal code. So for example, if I wanted a nice bright green, I could do 00FF00, right? But I'm going to do maroon. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to associate a variable with this. And I'm just going to call this Pro1 for Progress 1, whatever. The next thing I can do is after the comma, where you, let's say if this was a text field, this would be where you put your text, or an edit box, this is where you put your text. In here, what you're going to do is fill in what value does it have to begin with. So to begin with, we want it to be completely empty, so we're going to set a value of 0. Now by default, it has, if I don't set a range on this, by default it has a range of 0 to 100. But if I want to specify a specific range, I can just type in range and then start with, let's say, 0 to 100. I can also use variables as the values for the ranges. So for example, if I want to start with 0 and I want to go to some value that I get from a variable, then I can just include the variable. So let's actually do that. I'm just going to call this my range, and I'm just going to set it to 100. So in here, in the spot where I have the 100, I'm just going to change that with, in between percent marks, the variable that I created. And that works out the exact same way. Okay, so there's our progress bar. Everything should be set up with it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at how we actually interact with it, or how we get it to change. Now, a progress bar, by definition, in order for it to work, you have to know, like, you explicitly don't have to know what the range is going to be, but programmatically it has to have a range. Like, you can't just say, you know, I want you to increment forward 30 times, but the thing that you're actually incrementing actually has 1,000 things in it. So let's say if I have a list that I'm looping over and I want this to fill up each time it goes over one of the items, if I don't know how many items are in that list, then I have no way of actually doing a progress bar for it. And I'll go into that in the second example, but for the first example, all we're going to do is I'm going to create a couple of buttons. And I'm just going to set it X10. I'm going to let the Y do whatever it wants to do. And I'll do a width of 150 and a height of 30. Make it a nice big button. I'm going to attach two buttons to the same label. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give these buttons a variable name. I'm just going to call this one BU But1. And then I'm going to attach it to a label that's called add subtract, whatever. And then I'm going to put some text on it. And this one I'm going to say add to progress, and then I'm going to just duplicate that and make a few little changes. I'm going to add 10 between these buttons, or space them 10 apart. I'm going to name this one button 2, and I'm going to attach it to the same label, and this time I'm going to say subtract from progress. Okay, so there we go. I'm going to just go down and create this label now. And inside of this, I am going to check to see which one of the buttons is actually triggering this label to be executed. So let me add in my return before I forget. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if each time I click on my GUI on a button like this, for example, it's going to store the variable's name into a built-in variable called a GUI control. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to check to see if the value that's in that GUI control variable matches up to either of these two variables here. So I'm just going to say if a GUI control equals, and then I have to put these in between because it's going to have text in it. It's going to have like a string in here that matches the variable name. So I have to make sure I put this in quotes, because I'm not looking for a variable. I'm looking for a string of characters that matches that. So first, if it matches but1, then I'm going to do this. And because I'm a slow typer, I'm just going to copy this and drop down, and I'm going to say else paste button 2. So if it ends up being that it's button 1 that's getting pressed, what I'm going to do is I am going to take this progress 1 variable and I'm going to increment it up. So in order to get this value, because if you're aware from like things like the edit box or check boxes or radio buttons, as far as this variable is concerned, it has absolutely no value. Even though I've set a value here, it has no these two things aren't connected right now. So what I'm going to do is, before I hit the return, I'm actually just going to do GUI submit. So now, as soon as it hits this line here, this variable, this pro1 variable, will get the value that's sitting right there. Okay, so with that out of the way, what I can do is, because button 1 is where I want to add, so all I'm going to do is I'm going to take the value that's in pro 1, or the value that's here, which as soon as I run this program it's going to be 0. I'm just going to take that and I'm going to add 1 to it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to update that progress bar. With the value that's currently in the variable pro1. Okay, so that's that, and then now I can take this and I can paste it into here, and instead of adding to it, I'm going to subtract from it. And you know what, for this first example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the range down to 10. Now there's a couple of things that I need to amend with this, but I'll show you that in a second. So let's go. I think we have enough. Everything's okay to run now. So let's go ahead and run this. And if I hit add to progress, what should happen is it should start filling up. And if I hit subtract from progress, it should start subtracting from it. But the problem is that it doesn't have a way of stopping. So I've already gone past 0 now. So if I was to press add to progress, it has to get back to 0 again before it starts filling up. So to prevent that, in this case here, all I have to do is I just say and pro 1 is okay. So this is when I'm adding to it. So as long as it's less than or equal to 9, I can go ahead and add another one to it. And this one here, as long as pro 1 is greater than or equal to 1, I can subtract from it. Oops, did that backwards. Okay, so now I won't have the problem where if I subtract multiple times, if I hit add to progress, it should still just jump to 1. And there we go. Okay, so that's how I'm setting the range there. So this is a very simple example of just using how we actually increment the progress bar. Now let's look at a more practical way of doing this. So in the next example, I'm just going to create another button. I'm going to set this back to the X margin, or 10 over from the X margin. This time I'm going to attach it to a new label where I don't need to actually use the GUI control. I could put it in here. I could add everything in here, but I'm not going to do that. It's easier for the code to read it if you have separate things separated. So I'm going to attach this to another label that I'm going to call looping. And here I'm going to say loop whatever. Loop over list. Okay, and as in preparation for this, okay, I'm going to change this back to 100. In preparation for this, I created a little list to demonstrate it. So here I have just a string of numbers. They're not their values aren't important at all. So I need to create a label called looping. And I'm just going to add that list in. And like I said, all it is just the numbers 1 through basically 0 or 10 over and over again. So I have a total of 100 numbers. So this way I know how big my list is. And there's different ways. If I was like loading this from a file or something like that, there might be other ways that I would know how many things are in that file, because like I said, I can't use the progress bar unless I have a range, because using a range, if this has 100 items in it but my range is only up to 10, then it kind of defeats the purpose of having the progress bar, because it's going to get to 10 but the list isn't done yet. It still has 10 times more to go. So it's important that you know what the size of the things that you're going to be using the progress bar. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let me see. I need a couple of variables, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to immediately set pro back to 0. So if, just in case we were using that the other buttons up here, I'm going to set pro 1 back to 0. And then I'm going to update the GUI to make sure that it shows it as well. GUI control 1 and pro 1 with a value of, I could just dump a 0 here, but I can also just type in pro 1 again. Okay, and the next thing I'm going to do is, we need something to do with this list, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend that I want to put this into another variable that's all concatenated together. Rather than being in an array, I want to just put it into a single variable that's concatenated. So I'm going to say temp colon equals nothing. And then I'm going to loop over this list, and I could, if I didn't know what the value of this was, I could say, oh, give me the max index of it, blah, 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 and then set the range of the progress bar to that. But I already know how many items are in this list, so I don't need to do that. I know it's 100 items, so I'm just going to do 100. to keep this a little bit faster. But like I said, I could check to see what the max index is of this and then use that to set the range of that. And actually the third example, this is the second example, the third example I'm going to show you how to change the range on the fly. Okay, so we're going to loop over that, and all we're going to do is I'm going to take that temp variable and it's going to equal list 1 A index. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to increment the pro1 variable. Plus, and then I'm going to update the GUI to show the progress bar going higher and higher. So GUI control, the GUI, the variable that I'm updating, and the value that I'm updating it with. Okay, so I think that is enough to do this. So let's go ahead. Now I do know I need to do something else to this, but I'll do that in a second. Let's go ahead and run this. Oh, I have an error somewhere. 36 blank parameter. Oh, I know why, because when I created this list I was using my auto tool and I forgot to backspace. Okay, so this time we're going to go and we're going to be looping over a file. Let's say we loaded this from a file or whatever, we're doing whatever, and we want to have show progress of its progress of doing something with it. So boom, it went too fast, right? It went through those 100 items in no time. So what I'm going to do just to slow it down a little bit is I'm going to add a little bit of delay. I'll add 33 milliseconds. So that's what I was talking about for this example. Alright, so if I hit loop over list, it's going to go through the list, and each time it goes through an item in that list, it's going to increment the progress bar. And I have it set to reset it each time, so if I press this again, it does it again. Okay, that's the second example, the last example we're going to look at, and then I'll show you a couple of samples of things that I'm not going to go into the code about how I did them or whatever, but I'll just show you a couple of examples of ways that you can use it. The last example we're going to look at is how to change the range on the fly. So right now you can't change this range, like it's set as soon as I built that GUI, but there is a way to actually change that range later on. So this is how you go about doing that. So to do that, I'm just going to duplicate this button again, and I'm going to put it beside it, and then I'm going to say here change range. And once again, I could put these, combine these with this one, but I'm not going to bother doing that. I'm going to create its own label. Change range. And alright. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create two variables that are going to actually hold my ranges that I want to use. Now, you're not necessarily going to want to set your variables like this, like it'll be some other process that's actually setting the value for the ranges, but this simple example will show you what I'm talking about at least, and you'll get the idea. So I'm going to create two variables. I'm going to call one low range, and I'm going to set it to a value of 10, and I'm going to create another variable called high range, and I'm going to set a value of 100. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reset the progress bar just in case it's been used for something else. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a toggle variable to toggle back and forth. So let's call it new range. Nah. Let's just call it range 1. Range 1 colon equals not range 1. And now I can test to see what value it has. So if it has a value of 1, if range 1, do this, and even though I can probably type that out just as fast as I can paste it, I'll paste it. And this one is going to be if not range. Actually, we'll do else if not range. So if it's got a value of 1, it'll do this stuff. If it has a value of 0, it'll do this stuff. So what do I want to do? I just want to change the range. So I'm going to say GUI control, the GUI name, followed by plus the option that I want to change, range, and I want to change the range from 0 to my new value. Now, because I can pick which one of these I want to use here, but I'm going to use low range. I'm going to use low range for the first one, and I'm just going to put in between percent marks, I'm going to type in low range. And which control am I doing the options for, which is Pro 1. And then I'm just going to copy this and paste it into here. And I'm going to change this one. Instead of having the low range, it's going to have the high range. And like I said, this is I'm just doing this to show me doing it with a button changing the range, but I could have had it done it like I could have, let's say if I want to change the range in here, let's say if to begin with it had a range of 10, what I could have done is checked the max index of this array and changed the range up in here to be 100, because I know it's 100, but I could have changed it up in here. So that's an example of where you would kind of put this in rather than having it in a button like this. I think I have enough code here to actually execute this, so let's go ahead and do that. So if I add right now, right now the range is 100. If I hit change range, it's going to reset this and change the range to 10 the first time. So now if I press this, you'll notice that it's going up by much faster. If I change the range again, now it'll be back to going up slow. Okay, so that is that. The last thing I'll show you is a couple of quick examples of where you can use it. So I have a program here that when I load it up, it has to load from a file. So I have it inside of that. I know how many items it has to load from that file. So I'm able to, each time it goes through one of the items, I can increment the progress bar for it. So if I run this program, I can see that it's loading the profile, right? And then the program's done. Do that again. So there's like 1,000 items it has to load, so it's going through a list just to show that it's loading it up. Another example is if you're creating a game or something like that, if you want to create a health bar, here's a simple example of that. So here I have a little missile, I have my target, and I have my progress bar acting as a health. So each time this missile hits this object here, it's going to do a whole bunch of things. It's going to make the missile disappear and respawn, it's going to make this shrink, and it's also going to change the health bar. So you'll notice that the button shrinks, the health bar changes, and the missile respawns. And then once the health bar gets to empty, it fills back up again. And it keeps track of how many hits. Okay, so that's that example, and then the last one is like this one here, where I have an alarm. I can set a basically a egg timer, and you know, if I want to set for like 5 minutes or whatever, I'll just set it for a really small amount of time, just so you can see. I'll set it for a minute. I'll hit set, and now it has 60 increments in here, one for each second, and as each second passes by, it'll increment up until it gets to the end and turn on the alarm. Blah blah blah. Okay, that should cover everything. If you have any questions, just leave a comment down below, and if I can answer it, I will. There's a bunch of things that I didn't talk about during this, but this is the basic stuff to get you started with it. Other things are mostly like doing cosmetic stuff with it, etc., etc. Maybe you want to have it, the progress bar, be hidden until it's actually being used. So for here where I created it, I could have it hidden, and then let's say when I hit this this button, let's say when I hit any one of these buttons, it shows it, and then when it's done, it disappears again, etc., etc. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to hit that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next one.